Well, I've got my panellists here. And Michael, I'm going to come to you just to pick up on Deborah's point there, that this is not just about it being embarrassing. This is about Britain's enemies watching closely, and any sign of weakness doesn't need to be shown.
Oh, no, I think you've got this wrong, because this was only a test situation. In the real thing, it would work, which is the line we're being fed by the Ministry of Defence, which is very bizarre. They're saying 2 tests in a row have failed, but these are test conditions which are different from real-world conditions, and in the real world, it will work. It's a bit like you sort of go to Toyota and say, sort of in the crash tests, all the dummies were decapitated, but we trust when it's real people, it will go okay. I don't understand whatsoever the line from the Ministry of Defence on this one.
Well, I'm going to be more charitable, saying that the technical details of Trident are such that I can believe that to be the case. However, I'm deeply concerned that this is the second launch in a row that hasn't gone successfully. We don't do launches that often. I mean, there have been about 190 successful ones in total, but the Americans are responsible for almost all. We have to have a deterrent that everyone understands is working, and given that the world is getting more complex, given it is getting more dangerous, given that other countries are indeed looking both for British protection, but also maybe to undermine us, we have to show that these systems work. And that is what the MOD is going to have to get its head around.
And for the longest time, the Americans behind closed doors were saying, look, you need to sort all this out. Now they're saying it publicly. In fact, some generals are publicly saying, we're not sure you're a reliable ally when it comes to these things.
Well, I think it's less to do with, obviously, this particular
no, but if you widen
But yes,
it out,
collectively,
yeah.
I think this suggests that, as has been said for some time, the world is getting more complicated. We have ever more challenges rather than fewer. And as such, we must have the defence capabilities to match them and meet them, and frankly exceed them. There's no point sort of playing catch-up. We've got to be ahead of the game. And I think that's what the Americans have been saying to us.
So, I mean, I suppose the problem with that narrative for me is you're sort of saying, look at the threats and then build a military accordingly. Now, I think to be realistic about this, you've got to recognise that a military is going to be somewhat proportionate to your economy. Now, I think the British, we've had this problem for a long time, which is that we still think that we should play the role that we did in the world at the beginning of the 20th century. So we've got this permanent seat on the Security Council because we won the Second World War. We are an independent nuclear power because for some reason we think we must have that stature. But we're 1% of the global population, 2% of its GDP. So, you know, you're saying we have to sort of increase spending to meet the challenges of the day. Now, I'm not necessarily saying cutting spending, but I'm saying, to me, it would be more realistic to say, what role do we actually want to play in the world?
Well, I think that's an important question to be debated, actually. You know, what role do the people of this country want us to play? And I think if it was put to them, you know, despite what you've said, Michael, I think people here still understand that a strong British defence capability is important for the free world to prosper, and that threats to that way of life, the way of life that we want to see preserved and extended, will then be able to be defended by our own capabilities. So it is about our own national interests here.
Well, so I think what everyone will agree with is that everyone wants Britain to have good defence capacities. But I would say one way to sort of come to terms with our new position in the world is to say, let's actually make our defence industry about defence. And too often I think the British have decided to invest in expeditionary warfare. We should be able to intervene anywhere. And, I mean, going back to what you said earlier, we seem to think that wherever the Americans go, we have to be able to go with them. And I think that's been disastrous in the last 2 decades.
Look, I think there have been examples when we haven't gone with the Americans, of course, and examples where we've gone and they haven't. I mean, Libya being a classic one there. The reality here is that I think we have to preserve offensive capabilities as well as defensive, because sometimes the best form of defence is attack. It just is realistic to do that. And if you get into a wholly defensive mindset, a good example was the French army in the interwar years, you end up having no sense of how to actually get around your opponent. And so you've got to have the offensive capabilities as well.
I mean, I think in theory, that's perfectly coherent what you've said. I mean, if we do look at the last 25 years of history, though, I don't really think what you've said has accorded with what's happened. I don't think the offensive capabilities we've exerted in the Middle East, for example, have made British people safer. And I think that should be really the core and the basis on which we make these decisions.
20 seconds.
I think you're, on that one, I think you're confusing the difference between war fighting, which we're quite good at, and peace building, which we're not. And that's the difference. I think you're right that actually peace building has led to problems, but actually the war fighting has been very successful.
They only need to build the peace because they overthrew the government in the first place. But
OK, well, we'll leave it at that. Alan, Michael, thank you both for joining us here on the panel tonight.